Okay, going home. During a recent conversation during lunchtime with my coworkers, we started talking about home remedies that we experienced while we were growing up. Before I start talking about these home remedies, I want to clarify that I'm not endorsing or promoting any of these remedies. These are just stories of things that they used on us as we were growing up. As a poor kid in Mexico, we very seldom went to the doctor because we could not afford it. But my grandmother was an expert in knowing what teas to use for what ailments. And she always kept an herb garden outside her window to make sure that we had plenty of herb for the different sicknesses that we might get. She had an herb that she could use for our headaches or stomach aches. She had several plants that took care of different stomach ailments. And not always having electricity, there was always a kerosene lamp in the house. And as strange as it might sound, kerosene was what they used on all the cuts that we used to get on our feet as we were running around barefooted. I'm not sure the scientific reason for using kerosene on cuts, but we never went to the doctor to get a tetanus shot. For burns, they would always use butter to put on the burns. As an adult, I know that that's probably not a good idea, but growing up, that's what they would do. For bumps on our head, they would always get lard and mix it with salt, and then they would rub it on the bump. Again, I'm not sure the scientific reason behind it, but we thought that it worked. For small cuts that would not stop bleeding, they would always send us out to look for spider webs. And so we would gather as many spider webs as we could, and then we would put it on the cut, and it actually did stop the bleeding. Now that is one remedy that I have used with some friends, even as an adult. When they have a cut that won't stop bleeding, I tell them, let's look for some spider webs. And it seems to work. Of course, honey and lemon for sore throat or for coughs. And as we sat there and talked about it, some of my coworkers came up with some remedies that I had never heard about before. For example, one of my coworkers said that her father used to use his cigarette ashes for ringworm and that it seemed to help. Of course, she also added that that was just probably an excuse for her father to smoke another cigarette. Another coworker mentioned that whenever she would get a sty in her eye, that her mother would use a serrano pepper, not opening it, but just rub the skin around her eye, and that it seemed to help with the swelling. I had never heard that one before. Another co-worker mentioned that whenever she would get something in her eye, that her mother would take her hair and get it wet and then rub the hair in her eye, and somehow that removed the debris from the eye. Of course, all of us remembered the paper funnel for an earache. Basically, the idea was to make a paper funnel. You would lay on the ground and they would light the other end of the newspaper. And supposedly, the burning of the newspaper would draw the air out of the ear, thus relieving the earache. All of us were familiar with that, and we all seemed to agree that it seemed to work. Of course, probably not a very safe practice. Another co-worker mentioned that her mother would make lollipops out of onion juice and melted sugar, and they would suck on it whenever they were having bronchial problems, and that it seemed to work. Again, I'm not promoting or endorsing any of these remedies. These were some of the things that we remembered as children that were used to cure us in our home. How times have changed. My goodness.